So that is one of the biggest blind spots for us as human beings, is that we're unaware that we're actually inventing reality in each and every moment.
Welcome to Leadership Impact, the podcast for modern executives who are reinventing leadership within their organizations, with your host, executive leadership coach and CEO of the Granger Network, Kari Granger, and me, Paul Adams, CEO of Sound Financial Group. This is episode 3 of our 4-part series on performance, the subjective reality of human action.
Welcome back to the Leadership Impact. On this episode, we look at reality. So why are we looking at reality? We're looking at reality because as a population, we're confused about reality. We don't know what reality is, and we don't know what makes up reality. And as a leader, when we are confused about this, it's difficult to lead. So what we're going to find out in this episode is that human action is incredibly human. And what we've thought of as reality, those objective facts, those objective circumstances, the objective data, that's not what we're actually acting and interacting with. What we're acting and interacting with is our assessments about all of that. Yep, it's back to the subjective that we talked about in one of our very first episodes. We actually act and interact with a subjective reality. And so the real access point to reality is what we're going to call assessments. It's not the facts and data. So Paul, do you have some examples, real life examples from your life that we can take this more abstract idea and make it concrete and practical and usable for our listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. I had a colleague of mine owned a really fantastically successful company, great leadership, large depth of knowledge on his team, and a product that made a huge difference to the marketplace that they were in. But he hired somebody who previously had been enormously successful, somebody who was in the C-suite of the companies that he populated prior, like publicly traded companies. We're talking about somebody where in his prior role, people competed to get on his calendar. And in this new role, the opportunity was he had this large network of people that could use this product. And what he was going to do is reach out and start making phone calls to them. And it went splendid at the very beginning. But very quickly, his performance started to degrade and he started getting disengaged. Well, what had happened is he was reaching and calling people and not getting phone calls back immediately. He had some people say, we're just not interested in that. And by some people who prior might have even competed to be on his calendar, they were nearly dismissive of him. And what it made him feel like was some kind of schmarmy salesperson. And as I got a chance to talk to him a little bit, one of the things I discovered is I don't think he even knew the assessment that he had made about what they were thinking, which he made about him. So instead, he started going to the CEO saying, well, I think we need to change this about the process. And I think we need to approach this person a little bit differently. And they had a proven system, a proven company, a proven product. And now this new person that was supposed to be out attracting business was instead sitting back and pontificating all about what could be done differently. And the phone, my joke, started to weigh 10,000 pounds and he couldn't pick up the phone anymore to call anybody to make that next appointment so that the strategic leadership team that was there that could come into the client and make a difference never had those appointments. And he eventually left that industry.
Oh my goodness. That is such a good example. You know, I hear everything in that. One of the things that we often don't see is the weight of our assessment, you know, in the impact that our assessments have on our thinking, on our imagination, on our decisions, on our actions, what we can even see as possible for us, what we determine is impossible for us. And all of that impacts the actions that we take. So that is one of the biggest blind spots for us as human beings, is that we're unaware that we're actually inventing reality in each and every moment through our assessment. So as soon as he said, I'm a schmarmy salesperson, or maybe this process isn't right, or, any assessment, or they're wrong, they're wrong, I'm wrong, this whole thing is wrong. Now I'm a salesperson. And the assessment's about that. I think being a salesperson is amazing. I have a different assessment, right?
Mhm.
But you can hear the schmarmy or whatever you
Yeah.
said, right? All of that is his reality. Reality for him is not, I have a phone, I have 80 contacts, I have this amount of product or service. That's not the reality he's interacting with. He's interacting with, I'm wrong, they're wrong, the whole thing is wrong.
And it has a stickiness to it, the assessment that he made, because there were times where that person that didn't call him back got back to him and said, I'm so sorry because I was out of town for 2 weeks. There was a death in the family. I was unavailable because of a big project. I didn't call you back. But that feeling that was generated for him, that mood, when he made the assessment about why they weren't calling him back, that still stuck with him. And unless somebody could get in and really understand what he'd made the assessment about, which did not happen in time in this case, he was just stuck with it.
Yeah. I just got off the phone with the COO of a healthcare company. The COO was concerned about a regional manager's performance. And here's the coaching that I gave her is get interested in the regional manager's assessments. What has the regional manager made up about her ability, about the company, about her clients, about anything? Just stop and listen to the assessments that the regional manager has, because you'll start to get a sense for the reality that regional manager is operating in. And assessments are not, they're not hard like a table. They're not rigid. They're malleable. They can be altered through conversation. They can also be altered through mood, which we'll talk about later. But that's the access, because that's what this regional manager is acting and interacting with. To help our listeners get a sense for how do you listen for assessments, I'd like to just take a simple sentence. So something that I've heard recently, I'm not a PhD, so they won't listen to me. This is from an academic institution. I'm not a PhD, so they won't listen to me. That, for many of us, can go down in history like a fact, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's that collapsing of a fact and an assessment that gets us in trouble, that causes personal suffering, and that cripples our performance. So let me show you. I'm not a PhD. That's a fact. We could at least say, that's kind of a common sense fact, right? You either have been granted a PhD or not. Yeah.
Yep.
You could also say, for example, I'm not a VP. That could be, or I'm not an executive team member. I'm not a manager. There's a lot of, you could substitute your thing in there. So they won't listen to me. That, my friend, is an assessment. So as leaders, we've got to start to be able to pick up on these nuances, to be able to separate facts and data from assessments, so that we can hear what's actually impacting our way of being in the world, our moods, our emotions, and our actions. So while I'm not a PhD is kind of a fact, and you either are or you aren't, so they won't listen to me, that assessment, that swings into the future. And the thing is that as leaders and just as human beings, we constantly churn out assessments about everyone and everything all day long. And it's the accumulation of those assessments that either, in the best case, opens up new spaces of possibility for us, generates great moods, or in the worst case, closes down possibilities, produces negative moods, and halts action. So it is our assessments that make up what we relate to as reality, as the way it is.
And the way it will be, like in the example of they won't listen to me. So they're never taking the action because in their assessment, because they don't have a PhD.
Yeah. So what happens? They won't listen to me. So what do? I start to withdraw. I start to, maybe I'll do something else. I don't know. We have all sorts of different ways of interacting with that.
Well, in the case of my salesperson that in this story, what he did is he stopped making sales calls, which would have helped him be successful. And because that's salesy to make those calls.
Yeah.
And instead, he started spending a lot of time with people he already got along well with that weren't the best possible prospects, having coffee and lunch.
Yeah. Perfect. Perfect. Now, somebody who both of us really respect and has been a source of intellectual curiosity and even a teacher is Dr. Fernando Flores.
Yes.
So I want to acknowledge him in this episode because, it's his work that has made this more philosophy of speech, right? Philosophy of language more accessible to people like you and I.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I think he's the first person back in the 1970s anybody referred to as a coach outside of actual athletic domains.
Yeah, exactly. He is credited with bringing coach into the world of business and performance, human performance inside of businesses. Here's the thing I wanted to say about him and sales, because this is another, you can look, I'm a swarmy salesperson, or here's one thing that Dr. Flores says about sales. Sales, being a salesperson is being an ambassador of possibility. So think of the difference. And that's an assessment that a salesperson is actually an ambassador of possibility. So think of the difference if you are somebody who has an accountability in sales, the way in which you relate to your assessment of sales. I'm a swarmy salesperson, or I'm an ambassador of possibility. And think of how different that makes you show up, that makes you act, that has you think in different ways.
I love that, because now you've got a reason that you're reaching out, and it's possible that something could happen. It might not happen, and it has you not be attached as the speaker. It has them not need to be attached or feel pressure because it's just a possibility anyway. It's wonderful.
Yeah, and it has my attention on them and what's possible for them, not on me.
Yes. Oh, I love that.
So, Paul, this episode, while short, is about us starting to get related to the reality that we function in. We don't function in the reality of data and facts and circumstances, although many of us will say, no, Kari, we actually do. No, but watch, we actually act and interact with, function in our subjective assessments about all that. I mean, you could even see to the extent that what data and what facts do you even see or not see? It's all based on your assessment of what's important or what's relevant.
So the leadership challenge to all of our listeners this week is to listen for where the assessments are being made and be able to separate them from the facts. So when somebody says they won't listen to me because I'm not a PhD, just in your own thinking, be able to notice I'm not a PhD, fact, and that they won't listen to me, assessment, and start to watch how quickly all situations look differently to you and what other assessments could have been made other than the default ones that were served up to you.
Paul, before we wrap up today, I want to put in a pitfall real quick.
Yes.
So a pitfall is to think, oh, yes, I need to get rid of those assessments. They get in the way. No, assessments are neutral. And remember, we as humans, that is the reality we live in. So it's about mastering those. Remember from an earlier episode, we talked about mastering the subjective, not mitigating it. Same thing here. In fact, some of us get paid for our expert assessments. You get paid because you have an expertise in making great assessments in the domain of finances.
Yes.
I get paid because of my expertise in making expert assessments, grounded assessments, which maybe we'll say something about in a moment, in the field of leadership and performance. So assessments are not bad. They're neutral in terms of positive, negative, but they do have an impact. So how do you make an impact as a leader is to listen for and shape those assessments.
Well, and get a sense for what the outcome is going to be, and whether that is the outcome that leads you closer to the aims you're after or further away. And then that's how you can judge the assessment, not as that's a good or bad thing, which is where most people fall into. Kari, before we wrap today, can you touch a bit on what it means to ground an assessment?
Yeah. So grounding an assessment, so assessments are not true or false. And that's a thing that we have to actually get is it's not true that I don't belong, or it's not true that I'm the best thing that ever happened to this company. Yeah. But assessments can be valid or invalid. So how do we make a valid assessment is we do something called grounding assessments. And, the very first thing to grounding assessment is simply to even be able to say, for what purpose am I making this assessment? For the sake of what do I make this assessment? In other words, is a recreational assessment, which most of us do. That's called gossip. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Or is it an assessment for the purpose of moving something forward that I really care about? Then there's the question of, well, what specific domain is this assessment about? Is it about you just don't care? That would be an assessment. You don't care. Well, care about anything? Care about showing up on time? Care about our team project? Let's limit and restrict the assessment to a specific area. Then what's the criteria we're using to make this assessment? Is it, well, you don't care because you're always late. Well, what's the criteria? Your caring has to do with showing up on time or not? Well, do you align with that criteria? Do we have some kind of shared criteria in which we're using to make our assessment as you're meeting the mark or not meeting the mark? So a lot of times when we do deep coaching with people, we'll get most people, it's actually not funny. Most people at the very core have some version of, I'm not good enough. And when we get down to that, and that's an assessment, when we get down to that deep core assessment about oneself, what I sometimes ask, well, what's the criteria for being good enough? And there's no criteria.
Yes.
So then that's not a grounded assessment. Then we do actually like to bring in data and facts and circumstance events to ground our assessment. So we look, are there any supporting data or facts? And then we like to test it. Like, is there any data or facts that actually prove the opposite assessment? So in the case of not caring, I could say, here's some data or facts. You're late to 3 out of 5 team calls. But let me talk about, what data or facts could test my hypothesis. Well, you actually check in with your teammates every day to see how they're doing. That's actually some data and facts that support the opposite assessment. So then there's the authority piece of it. From what authority am I speaking? Or if there's an assessment coming at me, what's the authority of the assessor? And do I grant them that authority to make an assessment of me? So for example, Paul, you're in the financial domain. Sometimes I get really interesting financial advice from people. And I could take all of that and they actually have no authority in the financial domain, especially it just cracks me up, the people who, their portfolio is, I don't even think they know what a portfolio is, right?
Or the person they're telling certainly doesn't know what it is. The well-meaning brother-in-law, the car mechanic with the stock tip. Oh, yeah.
Right. And so do I grant them the authority to make an assessment of me? Or if I'm giving somebody else financial advice, I got to check my own authority. With what authority am I speaking? Whereas you, Paul, I would grant the authority. Yeah.
Yes.
So I think it's really important when we hear people's assessments or when we give assessments to think, from what authority am I speaking, or from what authority are they speaking? And maybe they don't have all the knowledge and expertise and degrees, but I still want to know, they're speaking from the authority of a customer who has a personal experience, but it's useful for me to know from where they're speaking or from where I'm speaking.
Yeah, it's that difference between a non-expert sharing their experience and an expert sharing expertise.
Yeah, so I want to know what kind of assessment, what's the flavor of this assessment, right? And then the last thing, and this is what the most important thing, I think, is now, what's my call to action? So the purpose of an assessment is to take productive action. Remember, we started, there has to be a purpose to making an assessment, not just recreational for a grounded assessment. So now, given all of that, what's the action that I see to take? So that's the last criteria. Can I see some kind of action to take now, having grounded this assessment?
That's really good. And Kari, I can't wait. We've got an upcoming podcast we're recording with Kari on Sound Financial Bites, the podcast that talks about money that I'm the host of, going into grounding assessment as it relates to your financial decisions so that we can get away from the opinions of everybody. I think that criteria, thinking through what is an assessment being grounded or ungrounded, is key. And we're going to spend an entire episode on that. Kari, anything else you want to make sure that people walk away with today or they're watching for this week around how unreal the reality is that they live in every day?
Well, it's real to them, Paul.
Oh, yeah. I forgot.
Yeah.
That was an assessment.
That's right. It's real to them. And I think, just really embracing the fact that the reality we live in is made up of our assessments and the assessments we inherit from others and the ones we hear from others. And if we, rather than trying to ignore all that, if we start to really learn to hear it and to see its impact, we can become very masterful in making a huge difference.
Thank you for tuning into Leadership Impact, the podcast for modern executives who are reinventing leadership within their organizations. Subscribe now at grangerNetwork.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And to support you in your leadership impact, we've created an exclusive worksheet on today's topic. Just text the word human to 900-900 and you'll receive the link. We also have a special offer for you. Between now and the end of 2018, you can register for any of Kari's online courses for a 50% discount with the coupon code CELEBRATE as we celebrate our launch at grangerNetwork.com. Join us for our next episode on performance.